In a small, quiet town in Delta State, Nigeria, there was a family that everyone admired. Mr. and Mrs. Jacob were kind-hearted and hardworking people, always ready to help their neighbors in times of need. They had been married for 7 long years without a child, but they never lost hope. Each year, they visited the hospital for checkups, and the doctors assured them that everything was fine, that their time would come soon. They were patient and kept their faith, trusting in the promise that one day they would be blessed with children. Finally, on their 9th year of marriage, their prayers were answered. Mr. and Mrs. Jacob were overjoyed to welcome their first child, a healthy baby boy. They named him James, after both of their fathers, as a symbol of their deep respect for family. 2 years later, they were blessed again with a beautiful baby girl. She had sparkling eyes and a sweet smile that could light up any room. They named her Esther, which means star, because she was their shining star, filling their home with joy and laughter. The family was complete, and the love between James, Esther, and their parents grew stronger each day. Mr. and Mrs. Jacob loved their children deeply. They promised to provide them with everything they needed, to make sure they had the best opportunities in life. Every day, they worked hard to create a comfortable and happy home for their little ones. Mr. Jacob had a special bond with his son, James. He loved him dearly and would often surprise him with thoughtful gifts. As James grew older, Mr. Jacob made sure to reward him for his good behavior. When James turned 9 years old, Mr. Jacob bought him a brand new smartphone. He believed it would be a great way for James to watch educational videos and play games, as he was very interested in technology. James was over the moon. He could hardly believe his eyes when he saw the phone. He immediately began to watch videos, learning new things and having fun playing games. His excitement was contagious, and he couldn't wait to tell his friends about his new toy. However, Mr. and Mrs. Jacob were often busy with work, and they didn't always have time to keep a close eye on their children's activities. They trusted that James, being a good boy, would use his phone responsibly. As time passed, James turned 10 years old. One day, he was sitting in his bedroom with his younger sister, Esther. The two siblings were watching videos online together, enjoying their time. As they scrolled through the video recommendations, something caught their attention. A video popped up, and Esther, with her usual curiosity, pointed at the screen. "What game is this? Let's watch it," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. James, always willing to share his discoveries with his sister, nodded eagerly. "What is it?" Esther asked, her natural curiosity piqued. "Come and see," James replied, climbing onto her bed. He unlocked the phone and showed her a video. On the screen were strange images of adults doing things they didn't fully understand. Esther frowned at first. "What are they doing?" she asked, her face filled with confusion. "I don't know," James said, giggling nervously. "But it's funny, and it makes me feel kind of strange." "Let's watch more," he added, his voice filled with curiosity. "Me too. My body feels kind of funny," Esther responded as she leaned closer to the screen, her eyes glued to the video. So, they continued watching. At first, it was out of pure curiosity, like discovering something new and unfamiliar. They didn't quite understand what they were seeing, but they couldn't seem to stop. Each video sparked more giggles, whispers, and feelings they didn't know how to explain. The more they watched, the more curious they became, not fully realizing the implications of what they were doing. As the days went by, James and Esther's secret tryst became a regular occurrence. Every afternoon, when their parents were away, they would sneak into their shared bedroom, their hearts racing with excitement and a hint of fear. "It's a bit painful," James would whisper, his voice trembling slightly, but Esther would quickly silence him with a gentle hand over his mouth. Her eyes would sparkle with a mix of excitement and concern as she tried to calm him down. Their parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jacob, remained oblivious to the unfolding drama. They would leave the house early in the morning, before the sun had fully risen, and return late at night, exhausted from their daily endeavors. After a quick dinner, they would retreat to their bedroom, unaware of the secrets their children were keeping. As the nights drew darker, James and Esther's actions became bolder. They would steal glances at each other, their eyes locking in a silent understanding. The air in their bedroom would thicken with tension as they navigated the uncharted territories of their forbidden love. But for how long could they keep their secret hidden? The walls of their bedroom seemed to grow thinner, as if the very foundations of their family's happiness were being tested. By the time Esther got to 13 years, she had grown into a beautiful and curious young girl. She was in her first year of junior high school and was struggling to balance her academic responsibilities with her newfound interest in boys and relationships. One day, Esther woke up feeling unwell. She was experiencing severe stomach pains and was feeling dizzy. Her mother, Mrs. Jacob, noticed that she wasn't her usual self and asked her what was wrong. At first, Esther didn't think much of it, assuming it was just a minor stomach bug. But as the days went by, her condition worsened. She was constantly tired, her stomach was always churning, and she had lost her appetite. Mrs. Jacob grew worried and decided to take Esther to the hospital to get her checked out. Mr. Jacob, Esther's father, was equally concerned and decided to accompany them to the hospital. At the hospital, the doctor ran some tests and asked Esther a series of questions. Esther was embarrassed to talk about her symptoms, but she knew she had to be honest. After what felt like an eternity, the doctor finally emerged with the test results. His expression was somber, and Mrs. Jacob's heart sank. "What is it, doctor?" Mr. Jacob asked, his voice laced with concern. The doctor hesitated before speaking. "Mr. and Mrs. Jacob, I'm afraid Esther is pregnant." The room fell silent. Mrs. Jacob's eyes widened in shock, and Mr. Jacob's face turned beet red with rage. "What?" Mrs. Jacob exclaimed. "How is this possible? My daughter, she's just 13 years old. How is this possible?" she demanded. Esther was stunned. She had no idea she was pregnant. She thought back to her encounters with James, her brother, and realized that they had been foolish and reckless. The doctor's words brought everything into sharp focus. Esther felt a wave of fear wash over her. What would her parents do? Would they disown her? As they left the hospital, the atmosphere was tense. Mr. Jacob was furious, and Mrs. Jacob was heartbroken. Esther felt like her world was crumbling around her. When they got home, Mr. Jacob demanded to know who was responsible for Esther's pregnancy. "Esther, who did this to you?" he asked, his voice firm but trembling. Esther was too afraid to speak, but she knew she couldn't keep the truth hidden forever. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Esther pointed to James, her brother. Mrs. Jacob's wails filled the room, and Mr. Jacob's face turned purple with rage. "How could you, James?" Mr. Jacob thundered. "You're her brother, for goodness sake." James was overcome with fear and guilt. "When did this start?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. The pressure became unbearable. Sobbing, Esther finally broke down. "James and I, we started when we were kids," she confessed, her voice trembling. James, overcome with fear and guilt, stuttered, "We saw it on the phone, and we tried it." Mrs. Jacob's wails filled the room. "My children, what have you done? You've killed me." Her mother's cry filled the room, raw and piercing. "Oh my God, my children," she wailed, clutching her chest as if her heart might burst. Her father sat frozen, his face drained of all color, as though the life had been sucked out of him. "I'm sorry," Esther whispered, her voice barely audible through her sobs. "I didn't know how to tell you." As the days went by, the tension in the Jacob household only intensified. Mr. Jacob was furious with James, and Mrs. Jacob was heartbroken over Esther's pregnancy. The siblings were not allowed to see or speak to each other, and the atmosphere was thick with anger and disappointment. Esther was devastated. She had never felt so alone and scared in her life. She was struggling to come to terms with her pregnancy, and the fact that her family was falling apart made it even harder. The Jacob family, once admired for their closeness, had been torn apart by secrets and silence. Their story became a whispered warning in the neighborhood, a tale of what happens when parents fail to guide their children and when secrets are left to fester in the dark. This tale is a reminder, no matter how carefully secrets are kept, they will always find their way to the light. And when they do, the damage they cause can never be undone. Parents, pay attention to your children. Teach them right from wrong. Protect them, not just from the world, but from the dangers that lie within. Because once the foundation of a family is broken, the pieces are never the same again. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, comment on what you learned from the tale, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more captivating tales just like this one. Thank you.